You ready to talk to some folks?
Yes. I have been waiting for this all week. Let's jump in.
Let's do it. We have our first call from Charles, calling from Pennsylvania. Charles, you are live on Talk Heathen. What's going on?
I hear you. Thanks. Yeah, they talk about evolution and stuff like that. And I talked to Richard Gilliver a couple of weeks ago. He said you had an evolution specialist on there. Wanted me to call in, but I couldn't wait too long. There was other people ahead of me. And so anyway, I'm glad I got in here today, but maybe you could answer. During the beginning, whenever humans were just evolving and this world is pretty primitive, there were wild predators evolving too. And mostly wild animals are a lot faster than humans. They have claws and sharp, big teeth, and so they could smell a mile away. And so if a human was evolving and he had a woman with him and a baby crying in the woods at night, and so the wild predators would hear that, and they were very hungry, so they would come after and find those humans and eat them. Basically, humans only have one baby at a time normally, and like say wild predators, they have a litter. They have a bunch of offspring. So it seems to me that you'd have a lot of wild predators searching for something to eat, and that little baby wouldn't shut up crying, and here comes. And how would man protect against that? And you can't tell me sticks and rocks, and they had fire, and they didn't have fire in the beginning, but I wouldn't imagine. But God protected man in the early beginnings from wild predators. That's my thought.
Okay, just real quick, in your point of view, how long ago are we talking here? As far as
that's the thing. I don't know. Yeah, and whenever man began to evolve, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I'm not sure anybody really knows that far back.
I'll give my take on this first, and then let Jimmy give his take on this. But you have to keep in mind a couple things here, because when we're talking about the origin of humans, that can be a little bit tricky. What we mean by modern, like Homo sapiens, right? One thing to consider with this is, remember, we're not the only primates on Earth, right? There are also gorillas and chimpanzees that also give about one baby at a time, right? That are very similar to us, and I would argue have less defenses than we do in some circumstances, right? I mean, certainly I don't think you think a chimpanzee is as smart, or a gorilla is as smart as a human being, right? Has the ability to manipulate tools and things like that. But even beyond that, right? There are animals that have different reproduction strategies. Deer, for example, right? Deer don't have any defenses whatsoever. They run is their defense, but we still have deer around. Why do we do that? Because prey animals have typically larger offsprings, right? So there's kind of an offset there. So while you may think of us as defenseless, early primates are actually predators in many sense. One of the ways we know this is that most predators on Earth tend to have frontward facing eyes, as opposed to eyes on the sides of their head, like deer do, and other what we consider prey animals. So there's a lot of speculation that early humans could be just as savage and just as predatory as any other kind of predator. Do we have weaknesses? Are there other animals that could prey on us? Sure. But if you think of the average ape size as well, I mean, that's typically larger than what you see in most ecosystems. We're very large organisms. That size in itself is very helpful. But the earliest of humans are speculated to have two different kinds of, mechanisms. One being the fact that we're bipedal means that there's speculation that we were able to run first, right? Which other apes aren't able to do. So we're kind of running on the savannah. We're able to actually track down animals using ambulatory predation, right? We're actually able to outlast a lot of animals in terms of our exhaustion and our ability to maintain stamina. We can do marathons. Other animals can't really do that, right? Animals like lions and stuff will do these sprints, but they can't really keep it up for that long. Cheetahs are known for going really fast, for example, but that's not something they can keep up for a long time. Humans can actually stay for long periods of time, which is interesting. So, and on top of that, of course, we have our tool making abilities and stuff too, right? So just point out there, we have a lot of actually ways we can support ourselves and also be predators, not just prey, that even other apes on Earth who don't have those kinds of tools, and yet still exist, to have this idea that, oh, we must have been protected by God. I would wonder if you'd say the same about bonobos or chimpanzees or gorillas, who are just as defenseless, if not more so, but yet still survive on Earth and, I don't know, still do well for themselves. Although their biggest, honestly, a lot of those animals' biggest harm is humans at this point, but that's for another day to talk about. Jimmy, what do you think of my answer, or what do you have to contribute? Because I know you have some thoughts too.
I do, and I thought your answer was very good. I like the idea about tools, but I want to kind of reflect on some of the things that. Excuse me. What's our Charles?
This is Charles from Pennsylvania. Yep.
Yeah. Some of the things that Charles said. So, first of all, people still get killed by predators today. Okay, yeah. So going through history, and you're not really giving us kind of a time period, but not everybody was protected. I mean, some people were still eaten, some people were still killed, and so that's important to figure out. Did God protect those people? Why did some people make it and some people didn't? And then why are we still being killed today? That happens a lot, all the time. The hippopotamus kills more people every year than any animal on Earth. So just some food for thought there. But, as humans were evolving, so were the predators, and so were our defense mechanisms against them, our methods. And you say, well, don't tell me we had fire and sticks. You know what? That's actually pretty important, for a group of weaker species to surround a more stronger and dangerous species, all holding sticks, all holding something, to where the animal realizes that it would have to take on the entire group, and then we're holding these things that make us look bigger than we are, is certainly a defense mechanism that would be effective. In fact, that's why we started doing it. Look at the cobra, for example. The cobra has maybe a 1.5 inch flap of skin on each side of its head that it expands when it's around a predator. Can it really defeat a predator with a flap of skin? No, but they have to look at that snake and say, this thing's bigger than I thought, and maybe they'll turn away, and that snake gets to survive. The pufferfish is another example. No tools of its own, right? But it's able to expand its body so that it looks like more of a threat than it is, and maybe a would-be predator decides to change its mind. And so those are kind of the things that just come to mind. There isn't a formula that works for one set or one ancestor of the human species that is consistent throughout time. It had to change as the predators changed. And we all kind of evolved together, and we are still evolving, and we're still being killed by predators. Finally, that brings me to my last point. How do we know that God protected anybody? I mean, that is the key question I have after your analysis, or your synopsis. You don't know how some people survived, therefore God is your answer. And that is insufficient for me. So I would ask you to kind of respond, please respond to what Dan and I had to say, but also tell me, how do you know that God was protecting anyone?
Okay, yeah, like say, I don't know, evolution, and what I said was maybe something that somebody could study and kind of pinpoint on that, but the reason I know that God is real, I called in before about this, I've randomly found a photograph of my grandfather on.
Oh, hold on, Charles.
Years ago.
Charles, I'm sorry. Charles, can I just step in here for a second? I'm sorry. So you said you don't know anything about evolution, and that's something that somebody would need to study, and you moved on. And basically, what I really want you to do is kind of try and harken back to the original intent of your call and answer. How do you know that God protected people? You called and you posited the claim that human beings survived and outlived some predator species because God was protecting us. And now you're transitioning to a picture of your grandfather. And we can't kind of move on just yet. All right. I want to know what you have to say about Dan and I, the responses that Dan and I gave you, and how you can attribute mankind's success to God.
Well, God can, if let's just say he was the creator, he can intervene any way he chooses. That's like people talk about the flood. I heard somebody say one time that back then there wasn't enough water to cover the earth. And so I thought about that, and if Jesus, assuming Israel, multiplied loaves of bread, then God could actually multiply how much water was on here and get rid of it again. I mean, he can do things when there's no witnesses.
But why would God want to evade detection? If he's got a story that he flooded the planet, why cover up his tracks?
He wants people to come through to him through faith. He doesn't want you knowing that he's real, because it'd be kind of like having a camera watching you every day, every move you made. You'd say, God's real. He's watching me. I better behave. And he wants you to kind of have that gray area maybe where, okay, I'm going to do what I want. There's no proof. I'm going to live my life and do what I want. So you're more natural as far as being watched, like that. And he doesn't want you to know he's real like that, I guess. He never gave proof to most people.
Well, wait, wasn't Jesus doing miracles for people? Wasn't that proof that he was God?
Oh, absolutely. But a lot of people don't even believe in
right?
Yeah. He gave proof, and there's a lot of people that doubt it and say, oh, that didn't happen or whatever. So it's not like proof that you see each and every day, and you lose things.
But I'm saying for those people, right? There was a select group of people in history that did actually get to see God and know that he was doing stuff, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was recorded by different apostles, I guess is what it is, and many different places. And it says in the Bible where about God says he warned not to change his word. Don't add to it or take away from it. And he said that because he knew people would, and apparently I think it happened.
But doesn't that kind of contradict your idea here that God wants to remain anonymous and have plausible deniability if he's like directly intervening in the lives of human beings, and apparently still continues to today?
Well, yeah, when the Bible and all that was wrote in ancient times, and it lasted up until today, it's a big thing. But in modern times, you don't see any of that no more. Like in Hebrews 1, it says God created the universe with his son Jesus. There's no more prophets after that. At that point, where he did away with the prophets that tell people, convey for God. He only used Jesus after that in Hebrews 1. And he only
Charles, I don't want to turn this into a sermon, right? I kind of want to get back to this idea that God specifically protects human beings, and therefore we owe our success to God. But God was not protecting human beings when he flooded the planet, right? And killed everybody, theoretically. God was not protecting the 330,000 children that were molested in French cathedrals between 1950 and 2023. He's not protecting, he didn't protect the people who were murdered in the Holocaust. I mean, do I have to really go down this road where I start throwing out every single atrocity that God chose not to intervene in, and point out that this idea that God specifically protects people is really not founded on anything that we can point to? Your analysis that God protected people, therefore we survive today beyond predators, and the fact that a woman was killed by a black bear 3 months ago in upstate New York. I read the article. I mean, that doesn't fit. So neither does the Holocaust, neither does the pandemic of child molestation that happens behind closed doors in cathedrals worldwide. I just don't see how you make the connection that God is a protector in any way, shape, or form. And I'd really like you to show us some proof, or give me something that's going to agree with you.
Well, he protected early man. That was a period time. And now things, he gave everybody free will to do bad things, good things, like that. I would like to get back to, now listen, I randomly found a photograph of 1934 of my grandfather. He passed away when I was a 4-month-old baby in 1958. And I pray about him. I visit his grave, and I think about him a good bit. I'm 65 years old. And 7 years ago, I was on eBay looking at old cars, past the time. I hit the seller's other item list on one of them, and he had a listing that said 4 old police pictures for $10. And because my grandpap was a police in Pennsylvania, I like him photos. So I clicked it on, and
oh, Charles, did we lose you? You there, Charles?
Man,
Might have just lost you there. Okay, well, that is unfortunate. Again, I'm hearing Charles make a specific claim. God protected early man, and I'm hearing no support for this whatsoever, other than, well, it would be weird if he didn't, because humans are, you know, protected. It's just this kind of question begging scenario, right? It's kind of circular. It's like, look, we're seeing this other stuff that the fossil record and other kinds of evidence have shown that there are such a thing as early human beings, right? And so, well, how can that be? How can we be around? Oh, it must be God, right? It's just God filling in the gaps, right? God of the gaps of whatever scenario you want to posit. And yeah, I think that's inconsistent with other ways in which God has failed to protect us. And I also don't know why God is like, okay, well, we have to keep the human species alive enough for them to evolve enough to have free will so that they can go against us, and then I don't have to protect them anymore. Like, it just seems a little convoluted. I don't really understand.
Yeah, but. And you know, this is the first time that I have ever heard that God doesn't want people to know that he's real. That is an extraordinary claim, considering God gave us the Bible, gave us his son, you know, go on, so on and so forth. So I just, you know, that was a shock to me.
I think we actually have Charles back on the line. Charles, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there we go. So Charles, let's I'll be honest, I wasn't quite sure what you were going with the story with your grandfather, but like, I think we still want to know about this question, right? You're making a very specific claim. You're saying that God helped protect early humanity. And I'm wondering, do you have anything backing up this claim? Do you have any evidence that we should look at, or anything that we can reason to make that claim true? Because that's not something Jimmy or I believe.
Okay, well, my claim is just basically a thought, because based on the amount of wild animals that are out there, like a chimpanzee or monkey, you know, they say, did you ever see a monkey kill something? They're very vicious, and they can grab their little baby and run up a tree and hide. I'd like to see a man run with his baby and his wife from like a lion or something, or have a stick or a stone, or even things that hunt in packs, you know, like wolves and stuff, like ancient wolves, even fish, if they went into the water, or there's so many other things back here.
Also, Charles, like, I don't live near lions. So like, that's not I don't have to worry about that. Like, a lot of humans just didn't live near lions. I don't know, or wolves. Like, that wasn't always an issue. And even when it was an issue, right, like, there are ways with dealing with that. And the fact is, humans did die from predators, like, a lot. It still happened, but there was enough of us to still survive. Evolution doesn't say, oh, well, if one species is superior to the other, then the other one gets completely wiped out. It just means that we're open to predation. Deer get predated by predators all the time. It happens every day. Same thing with rabbits. Rabbits are constantly dying to birds and other things, but they're still around because there are other strategies which keep them alive. In the case of rabbits and deer, right, they're able to repopulate in large numbers. But for human beings, I mean, there are other defensive mechanisms by which we can survive, and obviously still do. Otherwise, again, how do bonobos still live if they could be eaten by lions, or gorillas, or chimpanzees, right? Like, these are not small monkeys. These are large primates that don't have the same kind of defensive powers that a monkey does.
Yeah, I really can't answer. Like I say, I'm I guess a theist, but I can't answer for why things, how they played out and how they happened. But it was just my thought that God would have protected man and all the animals. He probably done a lot of things that maybe we couldn't understand.
Well, he can't protect all the animals, right, Charles? Because other animals have to kill other animals to survive, right? So some of them do get on the chopping block.
Right. Yeah. Like say, yeah, he can do things that we couldn't imagine, you know, little, when people die a certain age or babies, you know, or how old should somebody be before they can die anyway. He takes people, for different reasons that we could never understand, I imagine. But, the main thing is that that's where faith comes in, where if you have a firm faith and something bad happens to you and you pray about it, and one day you'll meet him and he'll be pleased with you, rather than if you would cuss him and swear at him and you're not real and you know, I hate you or whatever. But yeah, that's just my thought.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jimmy.
If he can do things that we can't imagine, and that's where faith comes in, don't you see that not knowing answers to things is what causes some people to come up with this idea of God? Like, you don't know how things happen, and you can't obtain an explanation. So therefore, there must be this all-powerful thing that's happening that people call God. Doesn't that make sense to you? How instead of investigating and looking for answers to some of the more trivial questions that are hard to really explain, that people kind of just settle on this thing that sounds good. I mean, that's what religion sounds like to me. That's what that reflects. It reflects an inability for humankind to answer some of Life Tough's questions. And instead of trying to go get those answers and say, hey, we don't know, we have to instead say, well, you know, there's a plan higher than us that we can't possibly understand. I just don't know how, if there is a God that created us and he wants us to do good and he wants to protect us, why doesn't he also want us to know that he's real and that there are reasons for some of the actions he takes? Because if his goal is worship, well, then wouldn't that convince somebody that why worshiping this God would be a good idea? Because for me, I don't see any good ideas.
Yeah, I'm not sure he wants you to worship him. He can judge.
Have you ever read the Bible? Have you ever read the Bible, Charles? Charles, have you ever read the Bible?
I read a good bit of it, yeah,
a good bit of it, Charles. This is your holy book. I mean, this is what you live your life on, and you've read a good bit of it. And I have to challenge you on that. I bet you a good bit of it to you is actually you just listening to somebody else read it to you. Or maybe you picked it up a couple times and started reading it and then put it back down, because that is what Christians do. I mean, that is what religious people do. They don't even know what it is they believe. I thought I was a Christian for 27 years of my life, and then I read the Bible front to back, and I said, what the hell have I been being taught my entire life? You know, you really got to look inside that book. If you think that God doesn't want you to worship him, it's obvious to me that you don't know the first thing about your own religion. And that is a scary thing, because you're dedicating your life to it. And I'm not trying to be rude to you. You know, I really appreciate that you called.
Yeah.
And I just get very worked up, you know, because I don't like to see people dedicating their lives to a lie and not even investigating.
Yeah, I'm more of I think a Calvinist. I know absolutely God's real. I've had so many miracles happen in my life. People say that's like scary in itself. And I never read the Bible when I come to believe in God. I never went to church. But the day when I found that photo randomly, I pray about my grandfather. He died when I was a 4-month-old baby. And I found a photo in Kentucky just that quick, randomly, of him. And my heart, where it was at about my grandfather, I was 52 years old when I started thinking about him. And all of a sudden, I said, this is weird. I keep thinking about him constantly. And the reason I knew that, I asked my older brother, he was 10 years older, and he about a year later, he found that same photo with the Historical Society. And he says, you know who that guy was on that motorcycle? It was my grandfather on a Harley for the newspaper, where they bought that brand new in a small town.
Okay.
Said, no, I don't know. He said, your grandfather. I said, man, I about fell over.
Well, Charles, let me ask you this. Do you believe that to be a miracle?
Oh, absolutely. I told
why is that a miracle? Can I ask you why you consider that a miracle?
I was drawn in. I was a sinner. I mean, I was not really a good person at all. And all of a sudden, but 3 years ago, I took that picture to Staples, and the manager said she went to visit her sister in Ohio last Christmas, and her sister's boyfriend had.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, Charles, just because we have a time limit for these calls, right? And I want to make sure that we're on track for this. We're kind of running out of time, so I want to make sure we kind of get on point with this, right? Well, let's start with this, maybe. What, in your own words, what do you think a miracle is? Like, what's a good definition of a miracle?
I don't even know, really. Like statistically impossible in my case. Excuse me. In my case, it'd be statistically improbable. I'm sorry. Events happening. Like, what's the chances that you ever have something like that happen? It's statistically improbable that could ever happen, but it happened to me several times. A lot of things that are just, and I know this is kind of crazy.
Let's look at this. I think that's a good place to start. So there's different people that have different ideas of what a miracle is, right? Some say statistically impossible, and you corrected yourself. You said statistically improbable, and I think that's great because improbable isn't the same as impossible, right? Improbable means it's unlikely, but it still could happen, right? So to summarize what you're talking about here, you're saying you found a photograph, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm just summarizing here, but you found a photograph that your brother also found from a historical society that was a picture of your grandfather. Is that right? Am I fairly summarizing that?
Somewhere close to where Grandpap was at, in a small town historical society. Now, the guy on eBay was in Kentucky. He was in Greenup, Kentucky. I called him up and asked him how he got that. He said he's a retired police officer down there, and my grandpap was in his uniform on a Harley, but he said he bought that on eBay about 10 years ago. His name's Steve, and he's just reselling some things. And he had 2 copies. He said, since that's your grandfather, I'll let you have both of them.
So and, your grandfather was from this small town. Your grandfather was from the small town, and there was pictures from this small town's historical society that had pictures of your grandfather, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain to me why that's improbable? That seems actually very likely, right? If your grandfather's from a small town and they have pictures from a historical society of that town, I would expect your grandfather, there's a good chance he would show up in it, right? It'd be weirder if he wasn't from that town and he happened to show up in it, right? I'd actually think that'd be more weird, but it's actually it's more reasonable that he would show up in it because he's from that town. So, like, can you explain to me where's the improbable part coming in? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I mean, my grandfather was a Pennsylvania small town patrolman. He really wasn't nothing, and the guy in Kentucky had it. And then the girl at Staples, she said to visit her sister out in Ohio last Christmas, and her sister's boyfriend had that same picture hanging on the wall in her bathroom when I took the picture to have it blown up and have a couple copies made.
So somebody else had that same picture that was unrelated, and that's where the improbability comes in. Is that right?
Yeah, like say I was surprised when he told me that. I said, "Well, it's out in Ohio, and
Kentucky, they're in a different state and they have this picture. Okay, now I'm understanding. I had to kind of put that together a little bit on my end. So that makes sense. That is improbable. You're in another state and you're seeing this picture that you happen to see, but they happen to buy a picture from a small town historical society. So again, that is a bizarre coincidence. But I am having trouble seeing how that could be a miracle in some ways. Because, again, something could just be improbable, right? When you think about, like, the lottery, for example, there's the chances are more than 1,000,000 to 1, right? I mean, very, very improbable that you win. But yet somebody wins the lottery, right? Somebody does end up getting it. So, I mean, it does happen, right? So what if this is just an event that has nothing to do with God whatsoever? Like, how would we know the difference between God being involved or God not being involved?
Hey, let me give you another example. My sister passed away about 30.
No. Hold on, Charles.
I want to know with this example, right? How do we know the difference between God being involved and God not being involved?
You just know it. I mean, I was 52 years old. I never thought anything about my grandfather. My mother was the only child. She never spoke of him. I never thought about him.
No, but that's not true, Charles, because you said you started thinking about him when you were 2 years old, and you thought about him a lot throughout your life.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, what do you mean you didn't talk about him? What do you mean you didn't think about him till you were 52 when you said that you'd been thinking about him your whole life? Look, I'm going to posit one last thing because we are kind of going on. And before I kick it back over to Dan, I just want to say, you're talking about a small town in Kentucky and a small town in Western Pennsylvania and a small town in Ohio. And, back in the 1930s, small towns in the Midwest were actually kind of popular, and they shared similar cultures. So for your grandfather to be part of a historical society, that would have been kind of a segue in from town to town, where they shared different practices, different cultural aspects. Their societies operated the same way. And so they might share maybe some similar artwork, photography, things like that. While it might be improbable, it's certainly not impossible. And I think it's probably all the more likely if we consider, the time frame that you're talking about in the way that this small town America was set up, especially in that area where there's really not even a whole lot of development now. That's what I want to posit. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And man, I've heard you say that you were like a bad person most of your life. I hate hearing that. You're a human being. We make mistakes. I want you to forgive your younger self, and kind of just move on and enjoy what time we have left. Cool. Well, I'm gonna say goodbye to you and pass it on back over to Dan.
Okay. Yeah. Real quick, Charles, again, just so we can let's end it on this, because we do have to move on to some other callers. But how do we know that this is an event that God influenced versus random chance? Can we tell the difference even?
I can. Like I say, you don't have time to hear all the things that happened in my life after I prayed about them. Okay. I randomly met a girl that my sister saved her life 40 years ago. And I prayed about her one night. And my buddy said, I woke up this morning. I thought about your little sister, Tracy. He says, she saved the girl's life at the state park up in the mountains from drowning. I said, well, I prayed about her last night. And like a month later, I met the girl randomly. She said, that was 40 years. I was telling her about the story. She said, oh my God. She said, I think that was me. I said, really? She said, yeah, that was 40 years ago. Okay. I said, bingo. Like that.
It sounds like other events in your life have also... It sounds like a culmination of events. It sounds like it's not just this one event. It sounds like in the context with other events is what qualifies this event as a miracle, right?
Yeah. Like say, there's so many. Okay. You don't have time, but if you heard,
we don't have time, unfortunately. But I want to leave you with this, okay? If you didn't have the context of those other events, right? If you just had this event to look at and you're not able to draw upon previous events, you're just looking at this one, would it be reasonable for you to conclude that God was involved? That's all I want to leave you with. And because that's really all the time I have for you today, Charles. But I am going to let you go. I'm going to, we got other people we got to talk to. Thank you again, sincerely, for calling into the show. And, we just enjoy the conversation. So thanks again for that.